Welcome everyone to the last session of the conference. Thank you for sticking around. I'd first like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands I'm speaking from today. In this session, the panel will be discussing mentorship in representative bodies, new opportunities for professional development. A program has been underway at North Queensland Land Council to give mid-career anthropologists the opportunity to receive mentorship from their more experienced colleagues. This program could perhaps serve as a case study for how we can practically address wider structural issues around the training and progression for in-house anthropologists who increasingly are taking up the roles of experts. Speaking on the panel today, we have David Martin, an independent consulting anthropologist based in Canberra. David's research and practice interests centre on such matters as social change, alcohol issues, Indigenous governance in intercultural domains, as well as native title. In his short presentation today, he will suggest certain key principles for mentoring, which have emerged in his own experience. We also have Pascal Taplin, who started off working with the Indigenous Rangers groups in Northwestern Northern Territory. And since moving into anthropology, she's worked with the Northern Land Council, Cape York Land Council, and North Queensland Land Council, where she is now developing connection material for various claims. And finally, we have Louise Allwood, who works as a research anthropologist at NQLC and is based in their Cairns office, where she was formerly the coordinating anthropologist. As I'm sure you're all aware, just a reminder to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. And Louise, if you'd like to get us started.
Thank you, Pepe. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the traditional, of where I am sitting today, the Yirraganji people. Surprising the world with its presence in 2020, the COVID pandemic has certainly changed our lives. As we are all aware, although Australia was not going to receive a large-scale dose of the pandemic until later, we, like the rest of the world, started to feel its effects immediately. The initial 10-week lockdown took its toll on most of us. It was a strange concept to be isolated from our friends and our families. It was a concept that became our reality. The world would not be the same again, with the introduction of masks and sanitisers, and not to mention that magically vanishing toilet paper. In the midst of the deprivation was the effects COVID had had on our workplaces. With the introduction of long-term working from home arrangements, North Queensland Land Council underwent a dramatic shift. No doubt alike of the other rep bodies and service providers. To start off with, NQLC didn't even have enough laptops for each staff member. And Zoom, well, what's Zoom? For the technologically challenged like myself, this foreign platform was going to take some getting used to. And here we are today. It's now become second nature to us all. For NQLC's anthropology unit, the biggest challenge was to work out how our consultant anthropologists were going to perform their interviews and fieldwork, especially when most of our clients did not, and many still do not, have adequate electronic devices and internet access. We were pretty much in a useless position during the lockdown period, so unfortunately a number of our consultants became stuck as they were at the interview and fieldwork stage of their research. We thought things would be all right again after the lockdown. Everything will go back to normal, our consultants will be able to get back out into the field. Well, as we know, the Queensland government had other ideas with their strict border closures and quarantining restrictions. With many of our consultants living interstate, this became a huge problem. So we had to go back to the drawing board. After much consideration, it was decided that we would start to take on some of our larger research projects in-house. This way, avoiding any of the border and quarantining issues, and most importantly, using this as an opportunity to upskill our senior anthropologists so as to assist with bridging the gap between the regular duties of an in-house anthropologist and that of an expert undertaking research and report writing. But how are we going to go about bridging this gap? Ironically, as we've all been faced with isolation from COVID, Pascal and I have undergone an additional isolation of another kind. As one of the steps taken to bridge this gap had to do with the setting up of our independence. Recognising that Pascal and I are employees of a rep body, whose primary focus is to act as legal advocates in the progression of native title matters, meant that it was essential that our independence be protected as expert anthropologists. The main steps that were taken was the formation of a new research unit within NQLC. This unit is structured separate to the claims unit, which is comprised of the legal team and the anthropology team, and who are managed by the principal legal officer. That is, the new research unit sits completely outside of that part of the organisation which is responsible for the progression of native title claims. Additionally, our position descriptions state that we are not subject to direction from North Queensland Land Council or staff in the formation of our opinions when undertaking expert research and report writing. Other practical steps were also taken to isolate us further. This has to do with the setting up of information barriers. That is, Pascal and I do not have access to the claim unit's electronic files, as blocks were placed on our electronic profiles, preventing us from accessing any of the claim files. This includes any of the legal or anthropological files, including the anthropological collection. Instead, we each had an empty electronic folder open to us individually. That is, my folder is only accessible to myself, and we are not included in on any of the claim team emails, and we do not attend claim team meetings or planning meetings. Additionally, we have been physically isolated in that we work from home on a more regular basis, and when in the workplace, we have been provided with a more soundproof office, where the ins and outs of the daily grind of the claims team is out of range of our hearing. The process that is followed when Pascal and I receive a research project from the claims team is the same as when NQLC commissions an external anthropological consultant, except that we don't invoice. We receive terms of reference, and correspondence is set up with the in-house anthropologist working on the claim and with the Anthro Administration Officer, who both act as contact points, providing all the necessary materials, such as anthropological reports and genealogies, all of which are delivered to us by a Dropbox account. In the question and answer time, I'd value hearing any other steps others have taken to assist with the setting up of independence for an anthro working in a rep body. Another step that has been taken to assist with bridging the gap is mentoring. Pascal and I have both received mentoring from our more experienced colleagues. Both Pam McGrath and David Martin have been my mentors over the last 12 months. Pascal and David will shortly speak about the experiences of their mentor-mentoree relationship. But before they do, I'd like to briefly mention a few invaluable learning experiences I had with Pam McGrath. Although there were many deep anthropological enlightenments of the type you'd be expecting to receive when you're a mentee, there was also several very practical learning experiences. And surprisingly, it turned out that it was these experiences which had the greatest impact on me, from the not so delightful formatting issues to being steered in the right direction of those elusive articles.
Louise, just about a minute left.
Yep, that'll be fine. But I think that the most important impact occurred at 5 weeks before the due date. At this point in time, I sent Pam my still not completed draft of the report to ensure that everything was anthropologically sound. I must say I almost fell off my chair when I received her feedback that I needed to completely reshuffle the structure of my report. That is, I needed to rewrite the report. Thankfully, the content itself was fine, but the report structure was terrible. I couldn't believe it and I started to panic. I only had 5 weeks to go and I still hadn't even finished the report. And now I needed to go back to the beginning. Oh, I couldn't believe it. So I did what any other conscientious anthropologist would do. I thought, stuff this, and I walked away just for a couple of days. After I got over my breakdown and I licked my wounds, I faced it again, tackling it from the beginning. At first, the pace was slow, but as I began to adjust the structure of my thinking, it started to flow. And I must say that, of course, Pam was completely correct. My original report structure was terrible. Look, it was a horrible experience, but really it was the most invaluable experience, and it's an experience that I am now very grateful to have gone through. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Louise. Pascal, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Louise. So I've been invited to talk about my experience employed as an in-house expert over the last year and a bit, along with Louise. And I suppose if you're listening, you might have an interest in developing a similar position in your own organisation. So I'll start by quickly sharing some of my learnings on the practical side of things, and then hopefully move on to a more broad discussion. So since late 2020, I've worked on connection material for 3 native title claims. 3 of my reports have been provided to state respondents in a consent determination context, and 1's been used for the purpose of a conflict mediation. I'm informed by my legal colleagues that first indications suggest the initiative's been received favourably. Insofar as we know, there have not been concerns raised in regards to our independence, the products, or the setup. Noting, of course, this is in a consent determination context, and who knows what might emerge in the context of a contested litigation. That said, we did hear from Justice Mortimer last year at the CNTA conference about getting on with things and not using insufficient budgets as an excuse to delay the progression of matters. So perhaps provided the quality of work's up to scratch, we might expect some understanding from that end. Which I think brings us to the benefits of the initiative in terms of organisational benefits, besides the obvious cost and workflow efficiencies. I suppose the standouts I can see are significant time savings, because it's effectively a 9 to 5 job. I'm not lining up and juggling multiple matters. I'm working on the priority matters set by the NTRB. And I think from the NTRB perspective, knowing that you have a full-time expert on hand and you don't have to negotiate windows of opportunity probably makes a massive difference when you're sitting around that planning meeting table. And I suppose I don't disappear off the books once the connection materials are provided. It's no big deal to provide ongoing support with those minor flow-on matters that inevitably pop up, and we don't have to develop that endless string of little contract extensions. In terms of costs and risks, I suppose I'd say this isn't a role for anyone. I came into the expert role after many years of experience working in NTRBs, not always as an anthropologist, but in later years as an anthropologist. And I would say that working in rep bodies is pretty much chalk and cheese to doing the full body of connection research. And many of the soft skills that I had to draw on in doing the connection research were in fact like research skills I'd developed in different contexts outside of NTRBs, but we might come back to that later. I think probably it's also not for every NTRB, and Louise spoke about some of the measures taken to establish the independence of in-house experts. I've been incredibly lucky today with my legal colleagues and their consideration of some really complex issues, such as when research exposes uncomfortable issues around adjacent determined matters. So in those sorts of cases, the roles need to be clear, and it certainly helped that despite being an employee, I was able to be really confident that the organisation would protect my independence. And I think one key learning, and bringing it back to the work I did with David, is that it's really important to understand that setting out the evidentiary basis and reasoning by which you come to form an opinion in a cogent and readable way in a report is a particularly niche skill set. In my view, this isn't an anthropology skill or even necessarily an academic skill. I think writing for the court or for a legal audience is an entirely different prospect than writing a report or a research paper. So like Louise, I think it was in framing my writing that working with David was most beneficial to me and was a particularly sensible investment early on by the NQLC. So I think we're about halfway in, and I'd like to take some time to weave in discussion of the structural and strategic issues facing the sector more broadly, being the last session after a really fantastic 3 days. David Trigger, in his opening address, spoke about the training offered anthropologists at Australian universities, and he also spoke about the jurisprudence and messaging we receive from the court about opinion evidence given by experts. And I think taken consecutively, these two observations paint a pretty daunting picture. The downward trajectory of tertiary courses featuring content relevant to native title anthropology, concurrent with the persistent pressure of the court's scrutiny of the relevance of anthropology expertise. I think there is a widening discrepancy in what we learn in our foundational anthropological training and the skills we need to apply should we choose to progress our careers towards providing expert evidence in court proceedings. I had a little search last night for university courses that included an applied Australian anthropology component relevant to native title. And I found just one undergraduate unit that stipulated content directed at native title available in 2022. So I took a quick look at ANU's anthropology major curriculum and found a single potentially relevant unit entitled Traditional Aboriginal Indigenous Cultures. But in the unit outline, there were no specific reference to the relevance of this issue to native title or to the specific issues that probably are more often subject to native title inquiries, such as classical land tenure. So obviously I haven't done a thorough survey of what's available, and if there's anyone listening in who has recent experience to offer, that'd be great. But I suppose I'm suggesting that perhaps there isn't a fit for purpose educational framework pumping out people with a high degree of specialisation in Australian native title or in Australian land-related issues, and that maybe this is a problem because it means that NTRBs are employing people who need to learn the basics on the fly. And we all know how difficult that can be in NTRBs.
Just 30 seconds or so, Pascal.
All right, I'll wrap it up. I suppose the nuts and bolts that new in-house anthros have time to learn are often regionally or claim specific rather than disciplinary foundations. And I think increasingly as a sector, we're missing consistency in our foundational education and training in native title anthropology. So I suppose this issue of foundational consistency is where I think projects like this, which enable and fund collaborative work between established experts such as David and those of us newly stepping into that role, could have broader positive impacts. And I think that has the potential to improve the cohesiveness of our sector. So that's really it from me. I'll pass it on to David.
Good. So I just want to talk fairly briefly about mentoring and the kind of thinking that I've done around what it is. A little earlier on today, Pascal and I are in different ends of the the North Queensland Land Council building. We're joking that at the end of all of this, we're going to start a rock band called Mentor as Anything. But because I can't sing, I'm going to have to be the drummer. So I'll give you a little bit of the drum now, in short. The first one is to look at what's the foundational way that I try and approach mentoring. And the very first principle, I think, is to accept are themselves experts in a whole range of things, not least of all in the claims that they're working with, in the ethno-historical materials, in the history, the social history since colonisation of the groups concerned, and of the politics of landed identity, really crucial things in a native title claim. So that's the first thing. This I think forms the basis to have mentoring not an instruction space where the expert is telling the mentees how things should be done, but rather a space of dialogue and mutual learning on the basis of which new, perhaps, tools for understanding this complicated work, not just the intersection of white Australia and Aboriginal Australia, but this intersection between anthropology and native title law, and indeed the law more generally. So that's the first thing, a space of dialogue rather than an information skilling page, framework. And then what flows from that? Okay, so the first one, as I say, is that people have their own expertise. Both Louise and Pascal demonstrated that more than adequately. They were thoroughly across the local ethno-historical records, in my view, far more than it's adjacent to. It's not so far from the bottom of Cape York, but I have no expertise in it. So that's the first thing. The next one is what are the kinds of, next thing I want to talk about, what can I contribute in this space? Pascal has covered some of them. It is what can I bring to bear? I think of it as tools to think and work with, not instructions on how to do things, but tools to think and work with in this really complicated task, as I say, at least two kind of intersections. And the first part of that is if the ethno-historical materials exist for that area concerned, and often they don't, or aren't complete, or are partial, or are difficult to interpret. If they exist, what can we learn from those materials about the classical society, as Peter Sutton calls it? And I think this is really important because it is necessary to understand something of that society, what the local organisation was, for example, in particular, in order to try and understand the impacts of colonisation, the impacts of settlement, dispersal, removals, and indeed staying on country as stock workers, for example. What are the impacts of those on the kinds of land tenure, local organisation system that exists now? I think one of the things that sometimes lacks in reports that I've reviewed and assessed is this lack of attention to, careful attention to what was in the past, possibly or probably or likely, and what is there. And just for discussion, maybe this, of course, has been complicated by the recent or relatively recent Malone decision with Justice Reeves, where I think objectively what was a singularly inappropriate model of one of the experts involved was adopted as the model, as this is how things were, when there's not I think a literature to demonstrate that that was the case. So it's not that these things aren't fraught. It's not that they don't offer us real challenges, but I think we need to have a good hold on what was likely there in order to understand what is likely here. And to give you one example of that briefly, the notion of borders. I think it's too common from my reading of reports, and also lawyers perpetuate this, to assume that the bounded cadastral type situation where claims have boundaries and then perhaps there are overlapping boundaries, to assume that that can be projected into the past as having been the case in the past. By and large, my working hypothesis is it was not. We need to think very much more carefully about the kinds of writing that very careful ethnographies of regions, I'm thinking of people like Lauriston Sharp in the base of Cape York and south of there, who said there is no such thing as a society, but rather a set of overlapping networks, depending what phenomenon you're looking at, local organisation, moieties or not, sections or not, etc., etc. Another one is the intersection with writing for the law. And this is a really difficult one. I think we are often trapped into writing, to being asked to give opinions about legal concepts. Are these traditional laws and customs as the law defines it? That's not our job. That's the job of the lawyers. In a very good article on this by Robert Blowers, SC, the lawyers are the advocates and we are the experts. We should write in anthropological language, in anthropological terms, but specifically to an audience so that what we write as anthropologists is accessible to the lawyers and to the law. Those are the kind of things I tried to bring to bear as ways of thinking about, and therefore structuring. The thing that Pascal mentioned, the reliance in what is defined as an expert, based on evidence, they would call evidence on facts, or what we might call the ethno-historical record, and that what claimants have said. based on the process of reasoning, which by definition has to be a specifically anthropological process of reasoning, and then the opinion, the concluded view that we come to. So that's the kind of things that I've tried to bring to bear in the mentoring I've done and thoroughly enjoyed with Louise and with Pascal. Thank you.